The Gamelin guard dragged the massive, shuddering beast into the sterile vet clinic. Metallic restraints, humming with contained energy, bit into thick, scaled hide. The air, already crisp with disinfectant, vibrated with the creature's pained exhalations. "Absolutely not," chirped Dr. Fleep, his multifaceted eyes widening, antennae twitching in disgust. "I will not treat a Kroglak." The clinic lobby, a pristine expanse of white plasteel and softly glowing Gamelin script, seemed to shrink under the Kroglak's presence. The creature, easily twice the size of a grav truck, thrashed weakly against its restraints, its 6 legs scraping against the polished floor, leaving trails of dark fluid. Each shudder sent a tremor through the deck plates. Doctor, the guard, his chitinous armor gleaming under the artificial light, responded, his voice a modulated rasp. "The Kroglak is severely injured. Protocol dictates." "Protocol be doctorin." Dr. Fleep's voice rose in pitch, his 3 hearts visibly fluttering beneath his translucent carapace. "That thing is a menace, a dangerous species. It should be exterminated, not coddled in a medical facility." "With all due respect, Doctor," the guard maintained his professional tone, "there are no other available veterinary facilities within a 5-parsec radius equipped to handle a Kroglak of this size. You are the designated specialist." Fleep's antennae drooped momentarily, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "Then reroute it, send it to anywhere else. I will not risk my staff, my clinic on that walking catastrophe." He waved a 3-fingered hand dismissively. "Remove it, now." Before the guard could respond, a voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "With all due respect, Doctor, I couldn't help but overhear." James Scott, a human veterinarian, stepped into the lobby, his brow furrowed with disapproval. His blue eyes, so different from the multifaceted gazes of the Gamelin, were fixed on the shuddering Kroglak. He radiated a quiet confidence that contradicted sharply with Dr. Fleep's agitated state. Karina, a senior Gamelin veterinarian and James's direct superior, hurried to his side, her mandibles clicking softly. "James," she said, her doctorice a low hum, "please. Dr. Fleep has made his decision. Gamelin safety protocols are paramount, you know this." She placed a calming hand on his arm, her touch soothed Doctor, icingly gentle. "We must respect Dr. Fleep's judgment in this matter." James gently disengaged her hand, his gaze never leaving the Kroglak. "Respectfully, Karina, I can't. That creature is clearly suffering. It's our duty to provide care, Doctor, regardless of species. Are we not healers?" Dr. Fleep scoffed, his antennae vibrating with indignation. "Sentimentality, typical human weakness. Kroglaks are nothing but aggressive beasts. I've seen them tear apart entire settlements. They're responsible for countless deaths." James turned his attention to Fleep, his expression firm. "This one is injured, Doctor. It's in distress. It deserves a chance. And besides," he added, his voice hardening slightly, "I am a qualified veterinarian, perfectly capable of assessing the risks. Furthermore, I believe galactic law stipulates that injured beings are entitled to treatment." Fleep's gaze narrowed. "And you are willing to assume full responsibility for any incident that may occur?" James met his gaze unflinchingly. "I am." Karina sighed, Doctor, her multifaceted eyes flickering between James and Dr. Fleep. She recognized the stubborn set of James's jaw, a trait she'd come to both admire and exasperate. "Very well, James," she conceded, her voice filled with caution. "You may proceed with a preliminary examination, but understand your actions will be meticulously documented. Any deviation from protocol, any misstep, will reflect directly on your record." James nodded, his focus already shifting back to the Kroglak. He approached the creature cautiously, his movements slow and deliberate. "Easy there," he murmured, his voice low and soothing, a technique he used with even the most skittish Terran animals. The Kroglak flinched, its massive head lifting slightly, revealing rows of serrated teeth. James carefully scanned the creature's body, noting the deep lacerations along its flanks, the labored breathing, and the overall signs of severe trauma. As he ran his hand along one of the wounds, his fingers brushed against something hard and unnatural. He probed gently, his expression turning grim. "This isn't a natural wound," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something metallic, embedded deep inside." He looked up at Karina. "I'm going to need specialized equipment, a bioscanner, heavy sedatives, and surgical tools. And," he added, his gaze sweeping across the sterile clinic, "I'm afraid your standard gamelin remedies simply won't do. We're going to need a full spectrum of human medications, including broad-spectrum antibiotics and potent analgesics." "I'm afraid you don't have what I need to treat this Kroglak." "Essential for Kroglak physiology," James finished, his voice tight with frustration. He gestured to the empty medication dispenser. "Without it, his chances plummet. We're talking organ failure within the next cycle." Karina sighed, her mandibles clicking softly. "Dr. Scott, with all due respect, this clinic operates on a budget. Acquiring rare alien medications and specialized equipment for every species that walks through that door I doctor imply not feasible, especially for creatures like this." Dr. Fleep, who had been hovering near the doorway, chirped, "Perhaps a concentrated dose of Xyler 7. It's readily available and has a broad-spectrum sedative effect. Might alleviate some of the pain, at least." James rounded on him, his fists tight. "Xyler 7? Are you serious? That stuff can cause severe neurological damage in Kroglaks. It's practically inhumane. It'll only worsen his condition." Karina stepped between them, her carapace shimmering slightly with suppressed irritation. "James, please, I understand your concern, but we need to be realistic. The Kroglak is not a priority patient. Use your ingenuity, adapt your human techniques, find a solution with the resources we have." James ran a hand through his hair, his gaze returning to Bruiser. The Kroglak lay still, his massive chest rising and falling shallowly. "Right," he muttered, already formulating a plan. "Okay, let's see. We can try a modified osmotic solution to stabilize his electrolyte levels, and I can rig up a makeshift filtration system to clear the toxins if I can find the right membranes." He began rummaging through the clinic's supply cabinets, pulling out tubing, filters, and various chemical compounds. As he worked, meticulously calibrating the makeshift filtration system, James's fingers brushed against a patch of raised, uneven skin on Bruiser's flank. He examined it closer. Scar tissue. And not just one patch, but a pattern of them radiating outwards like old wounds. "Karina," he said, his voice low, "have you seen this, these scars? They look like he's been through something like this before." Karina frowned, approaching the Kroglak cautiously. "I hadn't noticed. Kroglak physiology isn't exactly my area of expertise." James straightened up, a knot forming in his stomach. "Multiple similar injuries. It's like he's encountered the same kind of trauma repeatedly. What do you know about Kroglak encounters, Karina? Is this normal?" Karina hesitated, then tapped a command into her wrist-mounted datapad. "I'll look into it. Kroglaks aren't exactly a common topic of conversation around here." A few moments later, she grimaced. "According to the Gamelin Planetary Database, Kroglaks are often considered pests. They occasionally encroach on agricultural land. There are incidents." The Gamelin guard, a hulking figure with iridescent scales, shifted nervously, his multi-jointed fingers twitching near his energy rifle. "With all due respect, Dr. Scott, these creatures are known for their aggression. They are dangerous. I've heard stories." James ignored him, kneeling beside Bruiser again. He reached out a hand slowly, gently, and began to stroke the Kroglak's thick, bristly fur. "Easy, big fella," he murmured, his voice soft and soothing. "It's okay, I'm here to help." He watched Bruiser closely, searching for any sign of a reaction. A subtle twitch of the Kroglak's ear, a barely perceptible relaxation of his massive frame. Suddenly, Bruiser convulsed. His eyes snapped open, wide and unfocused. He thrashed violently, his powerful limbs flailing, sending medical equipment flying. James cried out as one of Bruiser's claws raked across his arm, leaving a shallow gash. Karina reacted instantly, firing a sedative dart into the Kroglak's thick hide. As Bruiser's struggles subsided, James noticed something. As the Kroglak calmed, James saw a flinch of pain. The Kroglak emitted a soft whimper, and the metallic fragment near the wound seemed to be the source. "Wait," James said, his voice urgent. "Look at that. He's reacting to that metal fragment. It's causing him pain." Carefully, James reached for the fragment, a small, jagged piece of metal embedded deep in the Kroglak's flesh. As he gently probed around it, he recognized the distinct design. This isn't shrapnel," he said, his voice hardening. "This is a hunting snare, a gamelin hunting snare." Karina's mandibles clicked sharply. "That's impossible. It's not a perfect match. We don't use those types of snares here." James held up the fragment, his eyes narrowed. "Don't we? Or do some gamelin have a hobby of illegally hunting Kroglaks?" Karina stepped back, her carapace overflowing. "That's a serious accusation, Dr. Scott. Are you suggesting that gamelin are deliberately harming these creatures?" "Are they?" James pressed, his gaze unwavering. "Because it sure looks that way to me." "There's a cultural prejudice," Karina admitted, her voice defensive. "They're seen as pests, dangerous pests, but illegal hunting, I know nothing about that." "I'm reporting this," James said, his voice firm. "This is a clear violation." Karina grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't, James, think about this. Reporting this will only create problems. Bureaucratic delays, accusations, investigations. It will take time. Time that the Kroglak doesn't have." Even as they argued, Bruiser's breathing grew more labored. His skin began to blotch, turning a sickly greenish hue. He was showing signs of an allergic reaction to the sedative, a severe one. James stared at the Kroglak, his face etched with worry. "He's deteriorating," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The sedative, he's having a reaction. We need to counteract it, and fast." He looked at Karina, then back at Bruiser. The clinic's limited resources, the lack of specialized medications, the growing evidence of gamelin prejudice. It all added up to a grim equation. He was running out of time, running out of options, and he was faced with a choice: continue against advice or report the crime. James didn't hesitate. "Cordrazine," he barked, already reaching for a hypospray, and something to stabilize his equivalent of histamine response. Now, he knew human antihistamines were a gamble, but the Kroglak's wheezing was worsening. "What's the standard gamelin anti-allergen?" Karina hovered, her mandibles clicking nervously. "It's not standard procedure, Scott. We don't administer medication without full." "He's suffocating, Karina. Override the damn system." "Now." James snapped, his voice tight with urgency. He prepped the hypospray, adapting the dosage calculations in his head, factoring in Bruiser's size, physiology, the alien readings scrolling across the diagnostic screen. With a frustrated hiss, Karina tapped a series of commands on the console, bypassing the clinic's rigid protocols. Automated systems disengaged. Manual control initiated. "But Scott, if this goes wrong?" The hypospray hissed, delivering the modified human medication into Bruiser's thick hide. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the Kroglak's ragged breaths eased. The rasping subsided, replaced by a deeper, more regular rhythm. "He's stabilizing," James said, relief washing over him. "But he's still weak. We need to keep a close watch on him." He glanced at the metal fragment still clutched in his hand. "And I want to know what the hell this is." Hours blurred into a tense vigil. James, fueled by caffeine and adrenaline, monitored Bruiser's vitals. Karina, her initial skepticism replaced by a grudging respect, assisted, charting the Kroglak's progress. As Bruiser rested, James slipped away to the clinic's small lab. Under the harsh glare of the diagnostic lights, he placed the metal fragment into the spectrometer. The results flashed across the screen. A complex alloy of gamelin origin, but with trace elements he didn't recognize. He cross-referenced the data with the clinic's materials database. Nothing. Frustrated, James bypassed the clinic's internal network, connecting directly to the restricted Gamelin planetary database. Security protocols flashed red, warnings blared, but he ignored them, driven by a growing sense of unease. He ran the alloy composition through the broader database. A single match popped up, designated alloy KH7, restricted use, hunting snares. His blood ran cold. He accessed the associated files, navigating through layers of bureaucratic jargon and classified documents. The truth hit him like a physical blow. Kroglak Population Management Program. Sanctioned culls. Officially authorized hunting zones. The Gamelin government was systematically targeting Kroglaks. He found data tables, population projections, maps delineating acceptable loss zones. He even found internal memos discussing the humane disposal of snared Kroglaks. James stormed back to the main clinic area, his face a mask of fury. Karina looked up, startled by his expression. "Scott, what is it? What's wrong?" "You knew," he accused, his voice barely a whisper. "You knew about this, about the hunting." Karina's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. "I don't know what you're talking about." James shoved a datapad into her hands, the screen displaying a particularly damning memo detailing the Kroglak pest control program. This is what I'm talking about. Sanctioned hunting. Population control. You knew they were being targeted." Karina stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and shame. "It's complicated, Scott. You don't understand." "Explain it to me then," James challenged, his voice rising. "Explain why it's okay to trap and kill an entire species just because they're inconvenient." "They're not just inconvenient," Karina retorted, her voice sharp. "They're dangerous, they attack settlements, they kill livestock, they're a threat to our people. And so the answer is to wipe them out." James countered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that the Gamelin solution to everything? Eradicate anything that poses a threat? It's a necessary measure." Karina insisted, her mandibles clicking defensively. "We have to protect ourselves. You humans wouldn't understand. You don't live with the constant fear of a Kroglak raid." "Fear," James scoffed. "So you justify cruelty with fear. What happened to compassion? What happened to your oath as a veterinarian?" "My oath is to protect life, Scott," Karina shot back. "Gamelin life. And sometimes that means making difficult choices." "Difficult choices," James repeated, incredulous. "This isn't a difficult choice, Karina. This is a moral failing. You're complicit in the systematic slaughter of an intelligent species." The air crackled with tension, the sterile clinic suddenly feeling like a battlefield. Karina stepped back, her antennae twitching erratically. "You don't trust me," she said, her voice barely audible. "How can I?" James demanded. "When you're hiding something like this, when you're willing to justify the unjustifiable." Karina hesitated, her internal conflict evident in her every movement. I can look into it," she finally said, her voice subdued. "I can use my influence to investigate the illegal hunting practices." "But you have to drop this, Scott. No official complaints, no accusations, just trust me to handle it." Before James could respond, a piercing alarm blared through the clinic. A red light flashed on the main console. Karina rushed to the screen, her mandibles clicking in alarm. "Distress signal," she announced, her voice tight. "Another Kroglak, snared, closer to the station this time." James felt a surge of adrenaline. "Where?" Karina tapped a few commands. "Sector Gamma 7, the signal indicates. Gamelin hunters, they're tracking it." "We have to go," James said, his eyes blazing with willpower. "Now." "It could be a trap," Karina warned, her voice filled with concern. "The hunters could be waiting for us." "Then we'll be ready," James retorted, already heading towards the transport bay. "We can't let them get away with this." They reached the transport bay only to find the clinic's small shuttle sitting inert, its power systems offline. James frowned. "What the hell?" Karina examined the control panel, her mandibles clicking in frustration. Sabotaged, she hissed. The power coupling has been severed. DRES didn't need to ask who was responsible. He could practically feel Dr. Fleep's smug satisfaction radiating from the walls. Damn it, he muttered. We don't have time for this. He grabbed a toolkit from the wall, his mind racing. Human engineering to the rescue, he muttered, already diving into the shuttle's wiring. He bypassed the damaged coupling, rerouting the power flow through a series of jury-rigged connections. Sparks flew, alarms blared, but slowly, stubbornly, the shuttle's systems flickered back to life. I still don't trust you, Karina shouted over the noise. I get that, James shouted back. But if we don't go, Bruiser will die, and another one will die too. Are you gonna let that happen? He slammed the access panel shut, wiping the grease from his hands. Let's go, he said, his voice grim. We've got a Kroglak to save. The shuttle roared to life, its engine screaming as James piloted it out of the bay and towards the distress signal, knowing that Bruiser's species was in even greater danger because of the gamelin. The transport shuddered as it set down in a small clearing, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and alien vegetation. James hopped out, his medkit bumping against his thigh. This is definitely the spot, he said, scanning the perimeter. The signal's strongest here. Karina followed, her expression grim. I don't like this. Too quiet. The forest canopy loomed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. Broken branches littered the ground, and a wide swath of churned earth marked the path of a desperate struggle. The air vibrated with a low, guttural moan. They moved cautiously through the undergrowth, the sound growing louder with each step. Finally, they reached a small ravine. At the bottom, caught in a thick metal snare, lay a Kroglak. This one was younger, smaller than Bruiser, but no less imposing. Her thick, armored hide was scratched and bleeding, and her massive, clawed paws were tangled in the cruel trap. She thrashed weakly, her eyes wide with pain and terror. Poor thing, James murmured, his hand instinctively reaching for his tranquilizer gun. Wait, Karina hissed, grabbing his arm. We're not alone. From the shadows emerged a group of heavily armed gamelin hunters, clad in camouflage gear. Leading them was a particularly burly individual with a cruel sneer etched on his face. It was Vorn. Well, well, Vorn sneered, his voice grating. The bleeding hearts have arrived. Stand aside, vets, Vorn commanded, leveling his blaster at James. This creature is a dangerous pest. It needs to be eliminated for the safety of the community. James bristled, his eyes hardening. That's not going to happen. I'm a veterinarian and I have a right to treat her wounds. We'll release her back into the wild where she belongs. Vorn laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. You humans are all the same, sentimental fools. This thing is a menace. It's killed livestock, destroyed property. It deserves to die. Karina shifted uneasily, torn between her loyalty to gamelin law and her growing respect for James. Vorn, she began hesitantly, perhaps we should assess the situation before. There's nothing to assess, Vorn snapped, cutting her off. It's a Kroglak. It dies. James ignored Vorn, taking a step towards the trapped Kroglak. Easy, girl, he said softly, his voice soothing. I'm here to help. Don't be a fool, human. Vorn roared, raising his blaster. Back down or I'll shoot. The other hunters mirrored his action, their weapons trained on James. Karina stepped forward, placing herself between James and the hunters. Vorn, lower your weapon. I am a senior veterinarian. I demand that you allow me to assess the situation. Her voice, though trembling slightly, carried an undeniable authority. Vorn glared at her, his face contorted with rage. Fine, he spat. But if that thing causes any harm, it's on your head, Karina. He lowered his blaster slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on James with undisguised hostility. James and Karina approached the Kroglak cautiously. As they got closer, James noticed something else, a large, distended bulge in her abdomen. Karina, he said quietly, she's pregnant. Karina's eyes widened in surprise. She ran a diagnostic scanner over the Kroglak's belly. He's right. She's carrying at least 2 young. James knelt down, examining the snare more closely. The metal was thick and reinforced, designed to hold a creature of immense strength. The trap was not just designed to capture any Kroglak. This wasn't a random snare, he said, his voice grim. They deliberately targeted a pregnant female. Karina examined the snare. She pulled out a small scanner, running it along the metal. Her mandibles clicked in agitation. There are markings here, she said, her voice tight. These snares aren't meant to kill. They're designed to capture Kroglak eggs and sell them on the black market. Vorn, overhearing their conversation, grew visibly agitated. Enough, he barked. Euthanize it, Karina, now. We can't let it reproduce. It will only make the problem worse. James jumped to his feet, his face flushed with anger. You callous bastard, you're not concerned about the community. You're just greedy. You want those eggs for yourselves to sell to the highest bidder. Karina looked from James to Vorn, her expression hardening. The truth of James's words hung heavy in the air. The black market for Kroglak eggs was a known secret, but to see it so blatantly confirmed, to witness Vorn's callous disregard for life, was too much. She made her decision. I won't do it, Vorn, she said, her voice firm. I will not euthanize her. We're taking her back to the clinic. Vorn's face twisted with rage. You traitor, he roared. You've sided with the human, fine. Then you can both die with the beast. He raised his blaster. Open fire. The hunters unleashed a volley of blaster fire. James grabbed Karina, shoving her behind a thick tree. Blaster bolts sizzled through the air, tearing through leaves and bark. The Kroglak roared in pain and terror, thrashing wildly in the snare. During the chaos, a stray blaster shot grazed Karina's arm. She cried out, clutching her wound. Karina, James shouted, pulling her closer. Suddenly, a searing pain ripped through James's side. He stumbled, his vision blurring. He looked down to see a smoking hole in his vest. He collapsed to the ground, landing heavily near the trapped Kroglak. The last thing he saw was her terrified eyes, reflecting the flickering light of the blaster fire. Darkness swam at the edges of James's vision. Red bloomed across Karina's hands as she pressed them against his side, her gamelan chirps frantic and unintelligible. The forest canopy above spun, a dizzying kaleidoscope of greens and browns. Guilt twisted Karina's face, hardening her willpower. I brought him here. I endangered him. Never again. She would protect James and the unborn life within the Kroglak, even if it meant facing Vorn's entire hunting party alone. Hold on, James, she rasped, her voice strained. We need to move. She looped his arm around her shoulder, grunting with the effort of hauling him upright. Come on, big girl, she urged the Kroglak, who lumbered beside them, her breathing ragged. Into the trees, now. James groaned, a sharp intake of breath. Her leg. He mumbled, his words slurred. He blinked, trying to focus. She's favoring her left leg, Karina. Vorn got her too. With grim efficiency, Karina ripped open a field medical kit. The blaster bolt had cauterized the wound, but the searing energy had likely damaged internal organs. Damn it. This will hurt, she warned, injecting a painkiller into his arm. His muscles clenched and he bit back a cry. It's a temporary fix. We need proper medical care, and soon. She glanced at the Kroglak's leg. A fresh snare wound oozed a viscous, blue fluid. She'd have to address that later. The Kroglak nudged James with her massive head, a low, mournful sound rumbling in her chest. It was a sound of profound sadness, a lament for the pain she sensed in him. Her large, intelligent eyes, usually fierce, were clouded with concern. The snap of a twig echoed in the distance. Vorn, he was relentless. Karina cursed under her breath. They were running out of time. She fumbled with her comm unit, trying to raise the clinic. Static. Nothing but static. Vorn must have deployed a signal jammer. They were cut off. Karina's medical training screamed at her. Human physiology was similar enough to gamelan, but James's body was reacting poorly to the gamelan-grade painkiller. His skin was clammy, his breathing shallow. She needed specialized equipment, knowledge of human anatomy. Things she didn't have in this damn forest. The barking of hunting dogs grew louder closer. Vorn was herding them, pushing them towards a kill zone. Karina helped James behind a thick, gnarled tree, positioning the Kroglak as a shield. They were trapped. Vorn's voice, amplified by a vocoder, cut through the forest. "Give it up, Karina. You can't protect him. Humans. Always clinging to the weak." "Just like when your little pet died, James. Remember, all those expensive treatments, all that wasted effort. And for what? It still succumbed to the rot." He paused, letting his words sink in. And the Kroglak, such a magnificent beast brought low by sentimentality. Did you know their eggs fetch a fortune on the black market? A delicacy among the Krell. Such a waste to let her live. The Kroglak shifted, her eyes narrowing. With a speed that belied her size, she lunged forward, the broken snare chain whipping through the air. It caught one of the hunters square across the wrist, sending his blaster clattering to the ground. "Now!" Karina screamed, adrenaline surging through her. She tackled Vorn, knocking him off balance. James, despite his pain, scrambled to his feet, grabbing a discarded vibro knife. Karina, years of training kicking in, disarmed the hunter closest to her, sending him sprawling with a swift kick to the groin. James, wincing, saw another hunter raise his weapon. Thinking fast, he ripped a small EMP grenade from the hunter's belt and tossed it at the thermal scanners attached to the hunter's helmet. The device sputtered, sparking and smoking, blinding the hunter. A searing pain ripped through Karina's side. Vorn had recovered and slashed her with a hunting knife. She stumbled, clutching her wound. The Kroglak roared, a sound that shook the very ground beneath their feet. The remaining length of snare chain snapped as pure rage surged through her. She charged Vorn, her massive jaws snapping. Vorn, agile despite his bulk, dodged the Kroglak's attack, plunging his knife deep into her shoulder. The Kroglak staggered, momentarily subdued. He raised his weapon to deliver the final blow. But then, groaning, he clutched his own side. "I'm not dying for this." Vorn limped back towards the remaining hunter. "We're leaving, she's more trouble than she's worth." Karina, barely conscious, gasped, "James, get out of here, take the Kroglak, he'll be back." With more. The forest clawed at them, vines snagging on tattered uniforms, roots tripping already weary feet. Each jarring step sent a lance of pain through James's side, the makeshift bandage doing little to staunch the bleeding. He tasted blood, metallic and unwelcome, and fought to keep the world from tilting. They stumbled upon it almost by accident, a narrow opening concealed behind a curtain of moss-draped vines. Inside, the air hung thick and damp, smelling of earth and something faintly metallic. A cave, not much but shelter. Karina leaned heavily against a damp wall, her breathing ragged. James, ignoring the throbbing in his side, knelt beside her. Her usually vibrant blue skin was tinged with gray. He gently peeled back the remnants of her armor, revealing the angry red gash on her thigh. Tiny metal shards, remnants of the grenade, were embedded in the wound. Grimacing, James used his multi-tool to carefully extract them, one by one. Karina bit back a hiss of pain with each tug. The Kroglak settled heavily onto the cave floor, a low, rattling pant escaping her massive chest. The escape was taking its toll, the added weight of her unborn pups a burden she could barely manage. James moved to her, his fingers probing the edges of the wound on her leg. The flesh around the hunter's snare was swollen and angry, a festering pocket of pus oozing from the torn skin. Infection. Bad. He scanned the cave, his eyes settling on a patch of broad, emerald-green leaves. He recognized them from his limited studies of Zalosian flora, a natural anti-inflammatory. Mixing it with the rich soil of the cave, he created a thick, pungent poultice. The Kroglak flinched as he applied it to the wound, a low growl rumbling in her throat, but she didn't pull away. "Hold still, girl," James murmured, his voice soft, soothing. "This will help." As he worked, he remembered reading about the Kroglak's unique gestational needs. A specific enzyme, only found in a rare type of bioluminescent fungi native to this region, was crucial for the pup's development. Without it, He voiced his concern to Karina, who was watching him with a mixture of gratitude and worry. "I'll find it," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "It's my duty to protect you both." She pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. "Karina, you're injured," James protested. "And you are more injured," she countered before heading out of the cave. James watched her go, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. He turned back to the Kroglak, who was now shivering uncontrollably, her thick fur doing little to ward off the creeping chill of the cave. Hypothermia. He hesitated for only a moment. Then, using his knife, he carefully shaved off sections of the Kroglak's own underfur, weaving them together to create a makeshift blanket. The Kroglak watched him, her golden eyes intelligent and trusting. He draped the crude blanket over her trembling body. Time stretched, each minute an eternity. Just as James was beginning to despair, he heard the rustle of leaves outside the cave. Karina stumbled in, her face pale, her breath coming in ragged gasps. In her hand, she clutched a handful of the glowing fungi, their ethereal light illuminating her exhausted face. She took one step, then another, before collapsing in a heap at the cave entrance. The Kroglak, sensing the immediate need, nudged Karina gently with her snout, then greedily devoured the fungi. A visible surge of energy coursed through her, the shivering subsiding, her breathing becoming more regular. A heartbeat later, the forest erupted. The screech of Vorn's voice echoed through the trees, followed by the staccato bursts of plasma fire. The entrance to the cave lit up with blinding flashes, the rock around them exploding in showers of sparks. "They found us," Karina yelled, scrambling to her feet. James grabbed Karina's arm, pulling her towards the back of the cave. He had noticed a narrow fissure in the rock face earlier. It was a tight squeeze, but it might be their only chance. They scrambled through the darkness, the Kroglak lumbering behind them, the sounds of the hunters growing closer. They emerged into the twilight, the forest pressing in on them. But James couldn't go any further. His legs buckled and he collapsed to the ground, a wave of dizziness washing over him. The world swam, and the last thing he saw was the Kroglak turning to face their pursuers, her massive form a shield between him and the approaching hunters. Vorn's voice cut through the air, triumphant and cruel. "Nowhere left to run, beast." Plasma fire scorched the earth around the Kroglak as she roared in defiance. One shot found its mark, searing a line across her flank. She stumbled, a guttural cry of pain escaping her as she fell to the ground, clutching at her stomach. Karina, despite her own injuries, hauled James to his feet, her grip surprisingly strong. "We have to go. Now." James, drawing on reserves he didn't know he possessed, helped Karina support the Kroglak, urging her forward. They plunged deeper into the forest, the hunters hot on their heels. They reached it suddenly, a gaping chasm splitting the earth. A ravine. Impassable. The ravine yawned before them, a chasm carved deep into the alien landscape. Shadows pooled in its depths, obscuring the churning water far below. "Too wide," Karina stated, her voice tight. "No chance of jumping that." James ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, his gaze sweeping along the ravine's edge. "There has to be another way." They moved parallel to the chasm, the Kroglak lumbering between them, each step a visible effort. After several minutes, Karina pointed. There, a ledge. A narrow strip of rock clung to the ravine wall, barely wide enough for a gamelan, let alone a Kroglak. "Unstable," James observed, noting the crumbling edges and loose scree. Karina didn't hesitate. She secured a thin rope from her pack to a nearby root, then began to traverse the ledge, her movements precise and economical. Small rocks broke away under her weight, plummeting into the abyss. "Precarious," she called back, her voice echoing in the vast space, "but passable, I think." James approached the Kroglak, placing a hand on her massive shoulder. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice calm and reassuring. "Slow and steady." The Kroglak shifted uneasily, her eyes darting towards the drop. He could feel the tremor in her muscles. He took the lead, testing each foothold before signaling her to follow. Her massive frame strained against the narrow path, her claws scrabbling for purchase. Halfway across, a section of the ledge crumbled beneath the Kroglak's weight. A shower of rock and dust filled the air, and she let out a startled roar, her front claws flailing. Time seemed to slow. James lunged forward, throwing his weight against her flank, his boots slipping on the loose rock. He felt a searing pain in his shoulder as he took the brunt of her weight, but he held firm. "Hold on," he grunted, his muscles screaming in protest. Karina scrambled back, securing the rope around a more stable outcropping. Together they managed to pull the Kroglak back onto the remaining ledge, her breathing ragged and heavy. They reached the other side in silence, collapsing onto the solid ground, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. A mocking laugh echoed across the ravine. Vorn stood on the opposite side, flanked by his hunters, their weapons glinting in the fading light. "Enjoying your little hike, veterinarian. It won't save you." Ignoring them, James helped the Kroglak to her feet. They pressed on, deeper into the alien forest. The vegetation grew denser, the air thick with humidity and the scent of unknown flora. Tangled vines snared their feet, and the uneven terrain made each step a struggle. The Kroglak's breathing grew more labored, and a wet cough punctuated her every few steps. James stopped, his face etched with concern. "Let me see." He gently examined the Kroglak, his fingers probing her flank. A low groan escaped her lips. When he pulled his hand away, his fingers were stained with blood. "Internal bleeding," he said grimly. "She needs immediate medical attention." They stumbled upon a small clearing bathed in dappled sunlight. A pool of clear water shimmered in the center, surrounded by lush vegetation. "A temporary respite," Karina said, her voice wary. James led the Kroglak to the water's edge. He soaked a cloth in the cool water and began to clean her wounds, his touch gentle and reassuring. The Kroglak flinched at first, but then seemed to relax under his ministrations. As he worked, his eyes scanned the clearing. He spotted a plant with distinctive crimson leaves, growing near the edge of the pool. He recognized it from a database he'd once accessed, a rare species known for its potent hemostatic properties. "That might help," he muttered, scrambling to gather a handful of the leaves. He crushed them between two rocks, creating a thick green paste. He applied the poultice to the Kroglak's wounds, the alien wincing at the initial sting. He could only hope it would slow the bleeding. Karina stood watch, her senses on high alert. She noticed a set of unusual tracks near the edge of the clearing, large, three-toed prints that radiated a faint, phosphorescent glow. "Something's coming," she warned, her voice low. "Something big." A rustling in the undergrowth heralded its arrival. A creature emerged from the shadows, its body covered in bioluminescent scales that pulsed with an eerie light. It was massive, easily twice the size of the Kroglak, with razor-sharp claws and teeth that gleamed in the dim light. It caught the Kroglak's scent and lunged forward. "Run!" James yelled, shoving the Kroglak forward. They fled blindly through the forest, the creature's guttural roar echoing behind them. They reached a steep embankment, the only way to escape. Without hesitation, James jumped, followed by Karina. The Kroglak hesitated for a moment, then launched herself into the air. She landed awkwardly, her massive frame hitting the ground with a jarring thud. A sharp cry of pain ripped through the air. The Kroglak's massive frame shuddered once, twice, then went still, collapsing onto the makeshift bed of woven vines and broad leaves. A low groan escaped her, a sound that vibrated through James's boots and into the damp earth. James pressed his palm against the Kroglak's flank, feeling for a pulse. His fingers, already stained crimson, came away slick with a darker, thicker red. "Damn it," he muttered, shifting his weight. He reached for the crude stethoscope he'd fashioned from a hollow vine, and a flattened listening disc pilfered from a discarded Gamelin comms unit. Pressing it against the Kroglak's chest, he heard only a faint, fluttering rhythm punctuated by gurgling. "Ruptured organ. Internal bleeding. It's worsening fast." Karina, her chitinous fingers flying across a diagnostic scanner she'd managed to salvage, confirmed his fears. The scanner beeped a series of rapid, distressed tones. Without advanced medical equipment, she has maybe hours, James, maybe less. James's teeth gritted, he knew it. He just didn't want to admit it. We don't have advanced medical equipment, Karina, so we improvise. He looked around at their surroundings. The dense alien foliage, the filtered sunlight dappling the forest floor, the limited supplies they had managed to gather. I'm proposing a surgery. Risky, I know. Improvised, definitely. But doing nothing guarantees her death. Karina recoiled, her mandibles clicking in disapproval. Surgery on a Kroglak with those tools. James, you'll likely cause more harm than good. We should administer a sedative and contact the authorities. Sedative won't fix a ruptured spleen, Karina, and contacting the authorities means signing her death warrant. Look, I've seen injuries like this before back on Earth. Farm animals, wildlife. The anatomy might be different, but the principles are the same. We need to stop the bleeding, repair the damage, and give her a chance. He met her gaze, his expression unwavering. I need your help. He rattled off a list of instructions, his voice calm and focused despite the urgency he felt clawing at his insides. I need a strong analgesic. That luminescent moss over there, the one with the blue spores, it's got numbing properties. Grind it into a paste. And that sap from the singing tree, it's a natural antiseptic. We'll need plenty. As Karina reluctantly began gathering the requested materials, James resumed his examination, probing the wound with careful fingers. It was then, deeper within the gash, almost hidden by clotted blood and matted fur, that he felt something hard and unnatural. He frowned, using a pair of modified tweezers to gently pull back the edges of the wound. He extracted a piece of twisted, jagged metal no larger than his thumb. It was dark, almost black, and intricately etched with unfamiliar symbols. He turned it over in his hand, a cold dread creeping into his heart. It wasn't shrapnel, it was something else, something deliberate. Karina, he said, his voice low and tight. What is this? He held out the metal fragment. Karina took one look at it and her carapace paled, her antennae drooped. Where did you find that? Inside her wound, what is it? James pressed, his eyes narrowed. Karina hesitated, her mandibles clicking nervously. It's a hunting trap, a specialized one, used for Kroglaks. James's blood ran cold. A hunting trap, you mean? Someone deliberately did this to her. He felt a surge of anger, hot and visceral. A gamelin did this, didn't they? Karina flinched, stepping back. I don't know who did it, but yes, those traps. They are used by some gamelin hunters. She denied any personal involvement but acknowledged the existence of such hunting practices within gamelin society. It is a sport and a means of population control. A sport, James exploded, his voice echoing through the trees. You call this a sport? He gestured to the Kroglak, lying still and bleeding on the ground. This magnificent creature is fighting for her life because some degenerate decided to use her for target practice. And you stand here and defend it. I am not defending it. Karina snapped, her voice rising to match his. I am merely explaining. It is complicated. These creatures can be dangerous. They threaten livestock. They're alive, Karina. They feel pain. They deserve respect. James's voice was thick with disgust. Is this what your society values? Cruelty? Indifference? Despite their heated argument, they both knew the Kroglak's time was running out. They moved with tense, strained movements, each acutely aware of the other's presence. The improvised surgery was a brutal ballet of desperation and skill. James, sweat beading on his forehead, worked with a focus that bordered on mania. He cut, cauterized, and sutured with the crude tools at his disposal, his movements precise and economical despite the gore and the alien anatomy. Karina, her face a mask of unshakable focus, assisted him, handing him instruments, wiping away blood, and monitoring the Kroglak's vital signs. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood and the sharp, acrid smell of the antiseptic sap. During a brief pause, as James struggled to tie off a particularly stubborn blood vessel, Karina spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew about the hunts, she admitted, avoiding his gaze. But I never realized the extent of it, the cruelty. James stared at her, his face etched with exhaustion and frustration. And you did nothing? Karina flinched. I didn't think it was my place. It was tradition, the way things have always been. James dropped the suturing needle onto the makeshift tray with a clatter. He stood up, his back aching, his hands trembling. Then maybe it's time things changed, Karina. Maybe it's time you decided what kind of person you want to be. If you can't handle the truth, if you can't stomach what's happening here, then leave. I don't need your help if you're just going to stand by and watch. He spat the words out, raw and unforgiving. You're complicit, Karina, complicit through inaction. Tears welled in Karina's multifaceted eyes. Her mandibles trembled. I will not leave, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I will stay, and I will help you save her because I see now, I see the value in what you are doing. As they finished the procedure, stitching the Kroglak's wound closed with painstaking care, a new sound cut through the tense silence. A series of low, mournful calls echoing through the trees. Kroglak calls. Much closer than before. Vorn's voice, amplified by some unseen device, boomed through the forest. I know you're there, human. And you, traitor Gamelin, you cannot hide. The forest belongs to me. James and Karina exchanged a look of horrified realization. They had been so focused on saving the Kroglak's life that they had walked straight into a trap. Vorn had been tracking them, using the Kroglak's distress signals as a beacon. There was no easy escape route, and they had a wounded Kroglak to protect. James hauled on the Kroglak's massive shoulder, Karina heaving from the other side. Branches whipped at their faces, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. They plunged deeper into the alien foliage, the Kroglak's rasping breaths a ragged counterpoint to their own strained gasps. Behind them, the telltale tick-tick-tick of Vorn's tracking device echoed through the trees, growing steadily louder. James risked a glance back. Through the dense undergrowth, he could just make out the faint shimmer of heat signatures on Vorn's thermal scanner, 3 figures closing fast. A low, guttural moan rumbled from the Kroglak's chest. James felt a vibration through his hands, a deeper resonance than just pain. It was a distress call, a thrumming pulse that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. He's calling for help, James grunted, pulling harder. Karina shook her head, her face grim. Or attracting predators, Kroglak distress signals. They advertise weakness, it's a gamble. James cursed under his breath. He needed to think fast. He remembered the dominance displays he'd observed on Earth, the way wolves used vocalizations to assert control. It was a long shot, but... He took a deep breath, trying to mimic the Kroglak's guttural moans, layering in a deeper, more resonant tone, hoping to convey strength rather than weakness. The effect was immediate and disastrous. The wounded Kroglak flinched, its good eye rolling back in confusion and fear. From the distance came an answering roar, closer now, infused with aggression. Wrong tone, Karina hissed. Definitely wrong tone. Vorn's voice, amplified by his suit, cut through the forest. Nice try, human, but Kroglak mimicry is a Gamelin sport. You're an amateur. Then came a high-pitched whine that made James's teeth ache. The Kroglak beside him shuddered violently, its moans turning into strangled cries. Sonic grenades, Karina yelled, her hands flying to her belt. Kroglaks are extremely sensitive to certain frequencies. She pulled out a small device, no bigger than his palm, and activated it. A faint hum emanated from it. This will generate a counter frequency, but the range is limited. Stay close. James scanned their surroundings, desperate for an escape. He spotted it, a narrow crevice in the rock face, barely wide enough to squeeze through. There. We can try to get him through there. Karina examined the opening. Too small, he won't fit. We can widen it, James said, pulling out his knife. He started hacking at the rock around the crevice, ignoring the sting of stone dust in his eyes. Just need a few more centimeters. Karina's hand clamped down on his wrist. James, stop, look. She pointed into the trees. A massive Kroglak was charging towards them, easily twice the size of the wounded one. Its eyes glowed with predatory fury, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. That's his mate, Karina breathed, her voice tight with fear. She heard the distress call, and she won't care who's friend or foe. We have to move him, James said, his voice urgent. Now she'll see us as a threat. They strained and heaved, trying to drag the wounded Kroglak towards the crevice, but it was too heavy, too injured to help. The approaching mate was getting closer, the ground trembling with each stride. Tick, tick, tick. Vorn was almost on top of them. We can't make it, Karina said, her voice filled with despair. We have to hide. She spotted a small cave, barely more than an alcove in the rock face. It was their only chance. They dragged the Kroglak inside, crouching behind its bulk, hoping the approaching mate would deter Vorn, at least for a moment. A blinding flash filled the cave, followed by a deafening crack. James cried out, his vision swimming with afterimages. The world spun. Gotcha, Vorn said, his voice dripping with triumph. The cave was bathed in harsh white light. James blinked, trying to clear his vision. Vorn stood at the entrance, his weapon raised, a predatory grin on his face. Then, with a surge of adrenaline that defied its injuries, the Kroglak lurched forward, throwing itself in front of James. A volley of shots ripped through the air, tearing into the Kroglak's already wounded flesh. It groaned, a wet, gurgling sound, and collapsed, its massive body shielding James from the worst of the blast. Karina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. James stared in horror at the Kroglak, its blood pooling on the cave floor. They were trapped, pinned down, with no chance of escape. Vorn stepped into the cave, his cybernetic eye glinting in the harsh light. The hunt is over, he said, his voice low and menacing. And I think I'm going to enjoy this one. Vorn's weapon spat globs of superheated plasma, each impacting the Kroglak's thick hide with a sickening sizzle. The beast shuddered, a low, guttural groan rumbling in its chest, but it didn't fall. It remained a living shield, buying James and Karina precious seconds. We need a distraction, James yelled, his voice tight with urgency. He fumbled in his medical pack, his fingers closing on a vial of concentrated pheromones, a concoction used to calm aggressive species. This might work. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled the vial at Vorn. The glass shattered against Vorn's armored chest, releasing a cloud of the potent chemical. Vorn staggered back, momentarily disoriented, his multifaceted eyes blinking rapidly. What is this? He slurred, momentarily dropping his weapon. Now, James barked, seizing the opportunity. Karina, crawl out the other side, I'll draw his attention. Karina, her face grim, nodded. Be careful, James. Using her smaller size to her advantage, she squeezed through a narrow opening in the back of the cave, a fissure barely wide enough to accommodate her slender frame. Jagged rocks scraped against her exoskeleton as she pushed through. James, heart pounding, snatched a discarded sonic grenade from Vorn's belt. Priming it with a twist, he held it out in front of him like a desperate offering. Vorn, recovering from the pheromone assault, refocused his weapon on James. A bolt of plasma seared through the air, striking the grenade in James's hand. The device sparked and sputtered. Shit! James roared, throwing the grenade at Vorn. The hunter dove for cover behind a rock outcropping but wasn't quick enough. The grenade detonated with a deafening shriek, a wave of concussive force washing over the cave. The ground trembled. Vorn, though shielded, still cried out, clutching his head. But a new sound, a thunderous bellow, echoed from the cave entrance. The Kroglak mate, drawn by the sound of the grenade and the metallic tang of blood, filled the opening, its eyes burning with primal rage. It was larger than Bruiser, its muscles rippling beneath its scarred hide. Vorn, disoriented and wounded, looked up at the enraged Kroglak and understood the gravity of his situation. Krauk. He croaked, fear lacing his voice. James, partially deafened and his ears ringing, his hand throbbing where the plasma bolt had struck, crawled towards the fissure Karina had disappeared through. His vision swam, blurring the already dim surroundings. The Kroglak mate charged, slamming into Vorn's hunting party. The hunters scattered, their weapons firing wildly, but they were no match for the enraged beast. James and Karina's only path of retreat was now a battlefield. Suddenly, Karina called out, "James, over here." Her voice was faint, but he followed the sound, emerging from the cave into the dense foliage. Hidden amongst the broad, alien leaves was a small, abandoned Gamelin hovercraft. The hovercraft was battered and stripped of parts, clearly scavenged. "It's damaged," Karina yelled over the sounds of the Kroglak's rampage, her hands flying across the control panel. "But I can reroute the circuits, just need a few more seconds." James stumbled out of the cave, taking in the scene. The Kroglak mate was tearing through Vorn's hunting party, tossing bodies aside like ragdolls. It wouldn't be long before its attention turned to them. "Karina, hurry!" James shouted, realizing the Kroglak mate was already turning its massive head in their direction. He knew they couldn't outrun it. Distraction was their only hope. Knowing the hovercraft was their only chance, James started yelling and waving his arms, trying to draw the Kroglak mate's attention. "Hey, over here, you overgrown lizard." As Karina connected the final wire, James was slammed to the ground by an unseen force. He gasped, pain searing through his ribs. The Kroglak mate loomed over him, its massive jaws dripping with saliva, its eyes filled with murderous intent. It lowered its head, ready to strike the killing blow. Karina, ignoring the sputtering engine and the sparking wires, slammed her fist on the activation switch. The hovercraft lurched to life, its repulsors whining, and she aimed it directly at the Kroglak mate. She had no idea if the jury-rigged vehicle would even function, but it was their only hope. The hovercraft lurched forward as Karina slammed the accelerator, aiming directly for the Kroglak mate. The beast, massive even compared to Bruiser, bellowed in surprise, its thick hide deflecting the brunt of the impact. It staggered, momentarily stunned, but far from seriously injured. Then the engine sputtered, coughed, and died. Silence descended, broken only by the Kroglak's enraged roar and the whine of failing power systems. They were sitting ducks. James, a searing pain lancing through his ribs, hauled himself over the mangled console and into the pilot's seat. "Karina, get it started." He grunted, his face pale with effort. Karina, her antennae twitching in panic, furiously worked the controls. The engine whined, then died again. "It's no use. The impact must have damaged something." James ignored the throbbing in his side and focused on the rapidly approaching Kroglak. Its eyes, the size of dinner plates, burned with predatory fury. "Just try again." With a desperate cry, Karina flooded the engine, and this time, with a shuddering lurch, the hovercraft roared back to life. She slammed the accelerator, and they shot forward, narrowly avoiding the Kroglak mate's swipe, its claws tearing a long gash in the hovercraft's hull. The Kroglak mate bellowed, a sound that echoed through the forest, and from the dense undergrowth other Kroglaks emerged, their eyes gleaming with predatory intent. The chase was on. James wrestled with the controls, navigating the hovercraft through the dense, alien forest. Thick, bioluminescent vines whipped against the windshield, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and strange, floral scents. He swerved to avoid a towering, tree-like fungus, its cap glowing with an eerie light. Branches scraped against the hull, adding to the cacophony of the chase. Suddenly, they burst into a small clearing. In the center, hidden beneath a canopy of woven branches, was a hunting camp. It was deserted, but the embers of a recent fire still glowed in a makeshift hearth. Rough-hewn benches and tables were scattered around, and the air hung heavy with the smell of smoke and something else, something metallic and sharp. James killed the engine, and the silence was deafening. He hopped out of the hovercraft, wincing as pain shot through his side, and began to examine the camp. He found snares, crafted from razor-sharp gamelin alloy wire hidden beneath piles of leaves. He found crude but effective, traps designed to collapse under the weight of a large animal. And then he saw it, a collection of sharpened stakes stained with a dark, viscous fluid, Kroglak blood. Karina followed him, her antennae drooping. She stared at the traps, her mandibles clicking nervously. She recognized the craftsmanship. It was gamelin work. James picked up one of the snares, the wire glinting in the dim light. He turned to Karina, his expression grim. "These aren't for pests, Karina. These are designed to inflict maximum pain." Karina flinched, but her antennae stiffened. They control the population. The Kroglaks are a danger to our agriculture. By torturing them, James's voice was low and dangerous. "Is that what you call control?" "It is necessary," Karina snapped, her eyes flashing. "You don't understand. They destroy our crops, they attack our settlements. We have to protect ourselves. And this is how you do it." James gestured to the traps. "This inhumane cruelty, there has to be another way." The ground trembled, the Kroglaks wherein osing in. "We don't have time for this," Karina said, her voice tight with anxiety. "We have to go." They scrambled back into the hovercraft, but it was too late. The Kroglaks, a dozen strong, emerged from the forest, their eyes burning with hatred. They were surrounded. "Run!" James shouted, kicking open the door and sprinting into the trees. Karina followed close behind, her face pale with fear. They plunged back into the dense forest, the Kroglaks hot on their heels. The ground was uneven, and thick roots snaked across their path. They stumbled and clawed their way through the undergrowth, the Kroglaks' roars echoing through the trees. Suddenly, the ground vanished beneath their feet. They found themselves at the edge of a massive sinkhole, a gaping maw in the earth that plunged into darkness. The air was cold and damp, and a faint, earthy smell rose from its depths. "This way," James yelled, drawing a small, handheld scanner from his belt. He activated it, and a beam of light shot into the darkness, painting a holographic image in the air. The scanner revealed a vast, underground cavern system, stretching far beneath the surface. The Kroglaks were closing in, their heavy footfalls shaking the ground. There was no time to hesitate. James grabbed a length of thick vine that snaked down the side of the sinkhole and fashioned a makeshift rope and harness. "Ready?" he asked Karina, his voice tight with adrenaline. Karina nodded, her face grim. "Let's go." James secured the vine around a sturdy tree root and began to descend, Karina following close behind. The air grew colder with each foot they dropped, and the darkness pressed in around them. Halfway down, James felt a sickening fray in the rope. He glanced up. The vine was beginning to unravel, strands snapping under the strain. "The rope!" he shouted. "It's fraying." Karina looked up, her eyes widening in terror. Above them, at the edge of the sinkhole, the Kroglak mate appeared, its massive form silhouetted against the fading light. It watched them descend, its eyes burning with cold, predatory intelligence. Then, with a sharp crack, the vine snapped. James and Karina plummeted the remaining distance, landing with a bone-jarring thud on the cavern floor. Darkness enveloped them. After a moment of stunned silence, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound echoed through the cavern. Click, click, click. It was coming from the darkness ahead. Something else was down there with them. The darkness pressed in, thick and absolute. James and Karina floundered, hands outstretched until Karina's hand clasped his. The clicking sound, a rapid, insistent pulse, hammered against their eardrums, each tick resonating with a growing urgency. James fumbled for his Omni tool, activating its light. The beam sliced through the black, revealing a cavern of impossible scale. Jagged rock formations loomed, disappearing into shadow above. Strange, bulbous fungi clung to the walls, emitting a soft, bioluminescent glow that painted the cavern in an ethereal light. The rhythmic clicking emanated from the fungi themselves. Each bulb pulsed with light, the glow intensifying and fading in sync with the sound, a bizarre, organic metronome counting down to some unknown event. They discovered a narrow passage leading deeper into the cavern, the clicking sound growing louder, more insistent with each step. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something subtly sweet, almost cloying. The passage opened into a hidden chamber, a Kroglak nursery. Eggs, leathery and veined with faint light, lay nestled in shallow depressions in the rock. Newly hatched Kroglak young, no larger than a human child, stumbled awkwardly on unsteady legs. These were not the armored behemoths they knew. These young were smaller, more vulnerable, their hides softer, lacking the thick plates and formidable spines of their elders. Their eyes, wide and unfocused, held a disarming innocence. James knelt, his veterinary instincts kicking in. "The pulsing fungi," he murmured, his voice hushed with awe. "They're crucial. Look, they're drawing energy directly from the light." He pointed to thin, tendril-like growths that connected the fungi to the Kroglak young. He also noticed something else, something deeply unsettling. Some of the fungi were damaged, their light dim and flickering. The young Kroglaks near these dying fungi were weak, their movements sluggish, their hides dull and lifeless. Karina approached, her antennae twitching. She ran a diagnostic scan with her Omni tool, her expression hardening. "These fungi, they're being eaten. Look at the residue. It's a specific gamelin species." A flicker of disgust crossed her face. A fungus-eating insect. James's brow furrowed. But why introduce them here? Then realization dawned. He remembered Bruiser's wound, the hunter's trap. "The clicking," James said, a cold dread creeping into his voice. "It's not just a pulse, it's a distress signal. The dying fungi are calling for help." Karina's mandibles clicked softly. "Those insects, they're not natural, they're genetically modified, bred specifically for Kroglak control." She hesitated, her gaze shifting away. "It's a closely guarded secret within certain gamelin hunting circles." James stood, his voice tight with anger. "You deliberately targeted the nurseries. You're starving the young, destroying their food source. Is that how you control the population? By wiping out the next generation?" He gestured to the sickly Kroglak young. "This isn't control, Karina, it's ecological collapse." Karina recoiled, her antennae flattening against her head. "The Kroglaks are a threat. They overpopulate, they destroy our crops. This is a necessary measure." But her voice lacked its usual conviction. She avoided his gaze. The clicking intensified, resonating through the cavern with alarming speed. The sound was closer now, louder, a chorus of desperate pleas. Adult Kroglaks were coming, drawn by the distress signal. Karina, torn between her loyalty to her people and the growing empathy she felt for these creatures, hesitated. Her hand hovered over her sidearm. James ignored her internal struggle. "We can save them," he said, his voice urgent. "We can save the young. I know how to stimulate fungal growth, how to administer nutrients. You know gamelin tech. We can do this." Karina looked at the Kroglak young, their wide, vulnerable eyes reflecting the faint bioluminescence. She looked at James, his face etched with tenacity. After a long moment, she nodded, her decision made. "I'll help. But understand this, James. This could be seen as treason." A guttural roar echoed from the passage entrance. The first Kroglak appeared, its massive frame filling the opening, its eyes glowing with predatory intensity. "Now," James shouted, already moving towards the healthy fungi. "We need to transplant them. Get me your Omni tool." Karina, snapping out of her hesitation, activated her Omni tool, her fingers flying across the interface. "I can modify the frequency, disrupt the insect's feeding patterns. Buy us some time." More Kroglaks lumbered into the chamber, their roars shaking the very foundations of the cavern. James and Karina raced against time, struggling to gather healthy fungi and transplant them to the damaged areas, desperately trying to save the Kroglak young before they were overwhelmed. The low growls resonated through the cavern, vibrating in James's chest. The adult Kroglaks, massive shadows in the dim light, circled the perimeter of the nursery. Their eyes, glowing with predatory intensity, darted between the humans and their young. But there was a hesitation in their movements, a flicker of confusion in their gaze as they registered that the hatchlings remained unharmed. James, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs, raised his hands slowly, palms open. He lowered his stance, making himself appear smaller, less threatening. He let out a series of soft, guttural clicks, mimicking the purring sounds he'd heard Bruiser make when content. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. "We're here to help. No harm." Karina, her Omni tool whirring softly, focused on the Kroglak's vocalizations. "I'm detecting a specific pheromone signature," she announced, her voice tight with concentration. "High levels of distress." They're terrified but also curious. Working in tandem, they used their Omni tools to project a low-frequency sonic pulse, clearing a small, safe area near the center of the nursery. The dying fungi crunched softly underfoot as they worked, the sickly sweet smell filling the air. Carefully, painstakingly, they began moving the Kroglak eggs and hatchlings, placing them gently in the cleared space. Each movement was slow, deliberate, a testament to their peaceful intentions. The adult Kroglaks watched, their growls softening slightly, replaced by a low, rumbling purr. As they moved deeper into the nursery, they encountered several Kroglaks who were too weak to move. Their scales were dull, their movements sluggish, their eyes clouded with pain. They lay listlessly amongst the dying fungi, barely registering the presence of the humans. James knelt beside one of the weakened Kroglaks, running his hand gently over its flank. "They're severely malnourished," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's directly linked to the fungi. They're not getting the nutrients they need." Karina consulted her Omni tool. "I have a gamelin medical compound," she said, "a broad-spectrum nutrient supplement. It's designed for emergencies. It won't cure them, but it will stabilize them, buy us some time." She retrieved a small vial from her medkit, the liquid inside glowing with a faint bioluminescence. With practiced efficiency, she administered the compound to the weakened Kroglaks, injecting it directly into their bloodstream. Within moments, their breathing became steadier, their eyes regaining a flicker of awareness. With the Kroglaks temporarily stabilized, James and Karina began harvesting the healthy fungi. Karina carefully adjusted her Omni tool, using it to generate a localized energy field that gently loosened the fungi's roots from the cavern floor. They worked together, carefully extracting the fungi and transplanting it to the damaged areas of the nursery. While harvesting, James noticed something peculiar. Near a patch of particularly withered fungi, he spotted a cluster of tiny, iridescent eggs clinging to the underside of a rock. "Karina, look at this," he said, pointing to the eggs. "I think we've found the real problem." Karina examined the eggs with her Omni tool. "Insectoid," she confirmed. "Their larvae feed on the fungi. They're destroying the root system." She adjusted her Omni tool again, modifying its frequency. "I'm going to overload their bioelectric field. That should take care of them." A high-pitched whine filled the air for a moment, then silence. The iridescent eggs shimmered, then collapsed into dust. As they worked, a large Kroglak, easily twice the size of Bruiser, approached Karina. It moved slowly, deliberately, its massive head lowered, sniffing her cautiously. Karina froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes widened, reflecting the Kroglak's predatory gaze. Fear, raw and primal, coursed through her veins. James, sensing her fear, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Easy, Karina," he said softly. "It's just trying to communicate. Stay calm, observe." The Kroglak nudged Karina gently, pushing her towards a section of the cavern wall. The wall appeared solid, seamless, but as Karina ran her hand over the surface, she felt a subtle vibration, a faint tremor beneath the rock. "There's something behind here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A hidden passage, maybe." James nodded. "Could lead to another nursery," he said, "or perhaps a source of fresh nutrients for the fungi. Either way, it's worth investigating." Karina activated her Omni tool, scanning the wall. "I'm detecting a structural weakness," she announced. "The rock is unstable here. We can clear it with minimal effort." With a flick of her wrist, she activated a focused sonic pulse, shattering the weakened rock. The rubble crumbled away, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. A rush of cool, humid air poured out, carrying the scent of fresh water and thriving vegetation. As the dust settled, they peered into the tunnel. It led to a vast, underground lake, its surface shimmering in the faint light. The air was thick with moisture, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the cavern. James pointed to a series of artificial channels carved into the rock, diverting water away from the lake. "Look at that," he said, his voice grim. "The water's being diverted. Someone's deliberately weakening the fungi, starving the Kroglax." Karina stared at the channels, her face pale with shock and disbelief. "The hunters," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "They're not just hunting them for sport. They're systematically destroying their habitat." She turned to James, her eyes blazing with newfound persistence. "I can't believe I was so blind. I have to do something. I'm going to expose them, James. I'm going to stop them, no matter what it takes." Her loyalty was no longer divided. It was now firmly with James and with the Kroglax. James and Karina followed the slick, algae-choked channels as they snaked away from the underground lake. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of processed water and the cloying sweetness of decaying fungi. Each step crunched on artificial sediment, utterly devoid of the vibrant life of the surrounding jungle floor. The channels were a stark testament to the ecosystem's manipulation, a silent scream against the natural order. The channels converged at a massive, cylindrical structure of dull gray metal, a pumping station. Pipes, thicker than James was tall, snaked in and out of the station, humming with contained power. Inside, banks of glowing panels pulsed with alien symbols, casting an eerie green light across the damp interior. Water gurgled through the complex network of pipes, diverted away from the Kroglax nurseries with cold, mechanical precision. James circled a particularly intricate piece of machinery, his brow furrowed. This is modified Gamelin agricultural tech, isn't it?" He pointed to a series of interlocking gears and energy conduits. "The core design is standard nutrient dispersal, but the power regulators, the dampeners, they're all custom jobs." Karina, her mandibles clicking softly, ran a diagnostic scan on a nearby console. "The modifications are extensive. The system logs are heavily encrypted." She paused, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the pulsing green light. "There are anomalies, files that shouldn't be here." James moved to stand beside her, his fingers flying across the console. "Let me see if I can crack the encryption." He worked quickly, calling upon every bit of his knowledge of decryption protocols, but the Gamelin system was too complex, too alien. After several minutes, he sighed, defeated. "It's no use. The encryption is too strong." Karina stood motionless for a long moment, her breathing shallow. Her carapace shimmered slightly as she battled with her inner turmoil. Finally, she stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the console. I have access codes, personal security overrides." Her voice was barely a whisper, "But using them, it's a violation of protocol, a betrayal of my duty." James met her gaze, his expression unreadable. He knew this wasn't just about unlocking files, it was about challenging it, everything Karina believed in. He simply waited, giving her the space to make her own choice. With a sharp, decisive movement, Karina entered her codes. The console chimed, and the encrypted files blinked into existence. Maps, schematics, and text filled the screen, detailing a systematic hunting operation targeting the Kroglax. These hunters, James's voice was tight with anger. They're not just controlling the population. They're targeting Kroglax with specific genetic markers. He scrolled through the files, his eyes widening in horror. Markers that might be linked to their resilience to the dying fungi. They're intentionally weakening the species. Karina stared at the screen, her body trembling. The files contained detailed maps of the Kroglak nurseries, marked with planned extermination routes. The hunters were coming back, and soon. "They'll be here soon to finish the job," James said, his voice grim. "Eggs, hatchlings. They won't care." Karina shook her head, her eyes darting around the pumping station. "We have to warn them. This station must have a communications array." But a quick scan revealed that the communication system was disabled, deliberately sabotaged. James refused to give up. He grabbed Karina's Omni tool and began stripping wires, his mind racing. "We can improvise. We can use the station's power source to boost a signal." He worked with feverish intensity, splicing wires, rerouting energy conduits, and muttering to himself, "If I can just recalibrate the frequency modulator." Within minutes, a makeshift transmitter stood precariously on a nearby table, humming with stolen power. James adjusted the frequency, his fingers flying across the improvised controls. Kroglaks use a specific frequency for long-range communication. It's a shot in the dark, but it's our only chance. He activated the transmitter, sending a high-pitched warning signal echoing through the tunnels, a desperate plea carried on the stolen energy of the pumping station. As the signal pulsed out, Karina discovered a hidden compartment behind a bank of control panels. Inside, racks of specialized weaponry gleamed in the dim light. Energy rifles, sonic disruptors, and neurotoxin injectors, all designed for one purpose: to kill Kroglaks quickly and efficiently. "They're not just controlling the population," Karina breathed, her voice filled with horror. "They're trying to eradicate certain bloodlines. They're committing genocide." A new grit hardened Karina's features. She activated her Omni tool and began inputting a complex sequence of codes, a sequence she hadn't used since her Gamelin military training. "I'm disabling the weapons." As she entered the final code, a piercing alarm blared through the pumping station. Red lights flashed, bathing the interior in a violent, pulsating glow. "What did you do?" James shouted over the din, his eyes wide with alarm. "I triggered a security alert," Karina said, her voice grim. "The hunters know something is wrong. They know I did it." A low, guttural hum vibrated through the floor, growing louder with each passing second, the sound of approaching engines. The hunters were coming. James grabbed a discarded wrench, his squeezing hard. "We're trapped." Karina drew her sidearm, her mandibles clicking with relentless drive. "Then we fight." The pumping station doors hissed open, revealing a squad of heavily armed Gamelin hunters, their energy rifles raised. At their head stood a high-ranking Gamelin official, his carapace gleaming with authority. He stared at Karina, his multifaceted eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Karina," the official's voice was a low, menacing growl. "Stand down, let us continue our operation. You are in violation of direct orders. Insubordination will be met with severe consequences." He paused, his gaze hardening. "Step aside, Karina, and perhaps your transgression can be overlooked." Karina stood her ground, her weapon raised, caught between her duty and her conscience at a moral precipice. "Karina," Commander Gorok's voice boomed through the pumping station's control room, amplified by the comm system, "explain yourself." The Gamelin's image flickered on the main screen, his mandibles clicking with barely suppressed fury. "Stand down, Karina. Recant your actions. This is your final opportunity." Karina stood tall, her green eyes fixed on the screen, her hand resting on the deactivated Omni tool. "I denounce your operation, Gorok. I will not stand by while you and your corporate masters exterminate an entire species for profit." Her voice, though amplified, held a fierce conviction that resonated through the chamber. "I pledge my allegiance to protecting the Kroglaks, and I will expose this conspiracy to the entire sector." Gorok's image pulsed red with rage. "Treason. Hunters, subdue her. Scott is to be considered an accomplice. Karina is to be taken alive if possible. Her betrayal will be dealt with accordingly." Before the nearest hunter could react, James, his eyes narrowed, moved with practiced speed. He hurled a small device, cobbled together from salvaged components of Karina's Omni tool and the pumping station's electrical system, towards the center of the room. The device detonated with a blinding flash of white light and a high-pitched whine, momentarily incapacitating the Gamelin hunters. "Now!" James yelled, grabbing Karina's arm. They plunged into the maze of maintenance tunnels behind the control room, the sounds of enraged Gamelins echoing behind them. The tunnels were narrow and damp, the air thick with the smell of ozone and stale water. Pipes snaked across the low ceilings, forcing them to duck and weave. Deeper within the tunnels, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its entrance concealed behind a false panel. Inside, rows of humming consoles illuminated a lab filled with complex genetic sequencing equipment. On the screens, James saw detailed analyses of various Kroglak bloodlines. "Look," Karina said, pointing to a highlighted section of code. "This data confirms it. The targeted bloodlines possess unique enzymes capable of neutralizing the fungal toxins." The pounding of armored boots grew louder. They were running out of time. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a small, dead-end chamber. Gorak and two hunters blocked their only exit. "Nowhere left to run, Karina," Gorak sneered, his weapon raised. James scanned the chamber, his veterinarian's eye assessing structural weaknesses. He noticed a critical join in the tunnel's support system, a point where several load-bearing beams converged. An idea sparked in his mind. "Karina, the lighting grid, can you overload it?" Karina understood instantly. She accessed a hidden panel and rerouted power to the chamber's lighting system. A moment later, James shot the junction box with his sidearm, creating a shower of sparks. The overloaded system buckled, causing a localized cave-in that blocked the tunnel entrance with tons of rock and debris. "That won't hold them for long," James shouted, pulling Karina through a narrow opening in the collapsing debris. The tunnels groaned around them, the walls vibrating with the strain. As they navigated the collapsing tunnels, a voice crackled over their comms. "Scott, Karina," Gorak's voice dripped with malice. "Did you really think you could stop us? You have no idea what you're up against. We know you're exterminating the Kroglaks." Karina retorted, her voice strained. Gorak chuckled, a chilling sound that echoed through the tunnel. "Exterminating? No, Karina, we're simply managing the population. My corporation is engineering an immunity to the fungus. It's much more profitable if the Kroglaks don't develop that immunity naturally, is it not?" The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "You're condemning them to a lifetime of dependence," James said, his voice tight with anger. "Precisely," Gorak said. "And to ensure they remain dependent, we remove the bloodlines that prove resilient. Reinforcements are on their way. They will seal off all exits from the pumping station. You're trapped, Scott, trapped with a traitor." James stopped, his gaze sweeping the tunnel. He spotted a narrow ventilation shaft, almost completely hidden behind a crumbling section of wall. There, that might lead to the surface. He tested the opening, but a look of disappointment crossed his face. "It's too small. You won't fit through with your armor." "Then go, James," Karina said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Expose this operation. The Kroglak's survival is more important than my life." "I'm not leaving you, Karina," James said, his eyebrows furrowed. "There has to be another way." "There isn't time," Karina insisted. "They'll be here any minute." The distant rumble of heavy machinery echoed through the tunnels. The reinforcements had arrived. The main exits were being sealed. James and Karina exchanged a desperate look. They were trapped, the tunnels collapsing around them, the hunters closing in from both directions. The situation was dire and time was running out. "The pumping station," James wheezed, his chest burning with each ragged breath. "Backup power. You said it was geothermal." Karina, slumped against the tunnel wall, blinked slowly. "Deep earth heat vents. Why?" James pointed to a narrow ventilation shaft running along the tunnel ceiling, barely wider than his shoulders. "That ventilation system. It has to connect to the geothermal system somehow. Maybe we can use it. Karina pushed herself upright, her face etched with doubt. The geothermal system, James, that's insane. Extreme heat, potential radiation exposure, gamelan safety protocols. Protocols be damned, Karina. James snapped, his voice tight with desperation. These tunnels are collapsing. Orcs hunters are breathing down our necks. We're out of options. The immediate danger outweighs the risks. He gestured to the cracks widening in the tunnel walls, dust raining down around them. We don't have a choice. Karina hesitated, her antennae twitching nervously. Fine, but I'm modifying my armor. I can reroute the ventilation system's emergency coolant. It might provide some protection. Working quickly, they scavenged tools and materials from the derelict maintenance tunnels. James held a flickering light while Karina used her Omni tool to reroute coolant lines and weld makeshift heat shields onto her already damaged armor. Sparks flew, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burning metal. The modifications were partially successful, providing a limited layer of heat resistance, but at the cost of further restricting Karina's mobility. She moved with even greater difficulty now, a grimace permanently etched on her face. They reached the entrance to the ventilation shaft, a dark, gaping maw in the tunnel ceiling. As James boosted Karina upwards, a volley of plasma fire erupted from the darkness ahead. The hunters had anticipated their move. The cramped tunnels became a kill zone. James returned fire, the sharp crack of his pulse rifle echoing in the confined space. They scrambled for cover behind overturned equipment, trading shots with the unseen enemy. Plasma bolts sizzled past, melting the rock around them. A glancing blow struck Karina's shoulder, the plasma searing through her makeshift armor. She cried out in pain, stumbling backward. "Karina!" James yelled, laying down a withering barrage of suppressive fire. He covered her retreat as she frantically worked her Omni tool, sealing off the tunnel behind them with a collapsing section of the ceiling. The hunters would be slowed but not stopped. They clambered into the ventilation shaft, the metal already radiating intense heat. The climb was arduous, the air thick with toxic fumes that burned their lungs. Karina struggled, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "How much further?" she croaked, her voice barely audible above the roar of the geothermal system. "I don't know," James replied, his own body slick with sweat. "Just keep going. Think of it like climbing Everest. Humans used to do that, you know, just for fun." He tried to inject some levity into his voice, but it came out strained and hollow. As they climbed higher, Karina's modified armor began to fail. The coolant lines ruptured, spraying scalding liquid. Her movements became sluggish, her eyes glazed over. She was suffering from heat stroke. "James," she mumbled, her grip weakening. I can't." "Yes, you can, Karina." James insisted, his voice firm. "Remember what you told me about the gamelan spirit, about never giving up. Now's the time to show it." He shared stories of human explorers, of Arctic expeditions and desert survival, tales of endurance against impossible odds. He painted vivid pictures of cool water and shaded forests, anything to distract her from the burning reality. They reached a junction in the ventilation system. A larger geothermal vent led upwards, promising escape, but another tunnel branched downwards, disappearing into the darkness. It looked like a maintenance access route. Karina sagged against the tunnel wall, her body trembling uncontrollably. Go on, James. I'll only slow you down. Get out of here." "Like hell I will," James retorted, his voice imbued with steel. He peered down the dark tunnel, his mind racing. "Stay here. I'll be right back." Without another word, he started down the lower passage, gambling on the slim chance that he could find anything to help Karina. The tunnel opened into a dimly lit maintenance area, the air thick with the smell of ozone and superheated rock. The hum of machinery filled the space, and in the center of the room, chained to a console, was a Kroglak. It was smaller than Bruiser, emaciated and covered in burns. Its eyes, dull with pain, flickered towards James as he entered. The Kroglak was a slave, forced to monitor the geothermal system's controls. James froze, torn. He had to help Karina, but he couldn't just leave this creature to suffer. His gaze darted to the control panel. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to regulate the vent temperature by Karina sometime. He had to try. The burns were extensive. Raw, weeping flesh stretched across the Kroglak's thick hide, the scent acrid and metallic like scorched earth after a lightning strike. Prolonged exposure untreated. James recognized the pattern, geothermal burns inflicted deliberately. He suppressed a surge of anger. He rummaged through his medkit, a leather satchel overflowing with human and xeno-compatible supplies. Limited, but enough. He grabbed a vial of concentrated aloe extract, a human remedy, and a small container of geothermal-resistant polymer gel used by Gamelin engineers. Improvising, he mixed the two in his palm, the cool aloe swirling into the viscous gel, creating a shimmering, opalescent paste. As he reached out, the Kroglak flinched, its massive body recoiling against the tunnel wall. Fear widened its reptilian eyes, but beneath the fear, James saw something else, a flicker of desperate hope. "Easy, big fella," James murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble. He moved slowly, deliberately, extending his open hand, palm up, a universal gesture of peace. Just like handling a skittish horse back home, he thought. Show him you mean no harm. His gaze drifted to the geothermal system, controls a labyrinth of glowing pipes, pressure gauges, and complex interfaces. He didn't understand a fraction of it, but the Kroglak's eyes kept darting towards the panel. He knew the system. If I can get him patched up enough, James reasoned, maybe he can adjust those vents. Cool down the tunnel for Karina. The thought spurred him to action. He dipped his fingers into the makeshift burn treatment and approached the Kroglak again. "This'll sting a bit," he said softly, knowing the words were meaningless, but hoping the tone would convey his intent. "Gonna make it better, I promise." As he began to apply the gel, gently spreading it across the seared flesh, he noticed the Kroglak's ribs were clearly visible beneath its thick hide. Malnutrition. Exhaustion. This wasn't just a slave. It was a creature deliberately starved and abused. He also noticed something else. A faint hum emanating from the control panel. A power conduit leading not just to the vents but also. James's eyes widened. Security doors, ventilation systems, the entire pumping station. The Kroglak shifted, groaning softly. It raised a massive, clawed hand, gesturing weakly towards the control panel. Guttural sounds rumbled in its chest, a desperate plea. It knew what to do. Suddenly, a piercing shriek ripped through the tunnel. The maintenance area's emergency alarm, blaring red light washing over the already chaotic scene. Enters in the lower levels, closing in. James's mind raced. He could try to manually override the vent controls, a long shot at best. Or, he could trust the Kroglak, heal him and let him control the system. Save Karina or potentially save them all. He made his decision. He finished applying the burn treatment, smoothing the gel across the last of the seared flesh. "Okay, buddy," he said, meeting the Kroglak's gaze. "Time to work some magic, cool those tunnels." The Kroglak, spurred by James's touch, by the first kindness it had likely experienced in years, struggled to its feet. The pain was evident in its every movement, but its eyes burned with tenacity. James braced himself, supporting the Kroglak's weight as it limped towards the control panel. He reached up, his massive clawed hand trembling as he tried to reach the interface. James gripped the Kroglak's arm, lending his strength. "Almost there," he grunted. "You got this." The Kroglak's fingers finally touched the controls. With a surge of effort, he began inputting instructions, his movements clumsy but precise. The vents. They were starting to cool. A metallic clang echoed from the doorway. The hunters. James grabbed a discarded maintenance wrench, its heavy head glinting in the emergency lights. He braced himself, feet shoulder-width apart, a predator defending its territory. Just as the first hunter breached the doorway, the Kroglak managed to reroute power. With a hiss of compressed air, the security doors slammed shut in a distant corridor, buying them precious seconds. The hunter lunged, a gamelin brandishing a stun baton. James sidestepped, swinging the wrench in a wide arc connecting with the hunter's helmet. The hunter crumpled. Another followed and another. The confined space was a disadvantage, but James used the geothermal equipment as cover, ducking and weaving between pipes and pressure gauges. But they were too many. He felt a searing pain in his side, then another on his arm. The Kroglak roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the tunnel. Seeing James in danger, it grabbed a discarded piece of metal, a jagged wrench, and hurled it at one of the hunters. The wrench struck true, knocking the hunter off balance. James seized the opportunity, disarming another with a swift kick to the wrist. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, despite the searing pain in his side, James fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a deep-seated refusal to let anyone suffer. He knocked them down, one by one, until they lay unconscious on the metal floor. He stood panting, the wrench dripping with a viscous purple fluid. His side throbbed and his arm hung limp. He was bleeding, battered but alive. The sting radiated outwards from the gash on his arm, a throbbing counterpoint to the chill that was already seeping into his bones. He leaned against the damp wall, the rough concrete grating against his back. The Kroglak slave watched him, eyes narrowed, a low rumble vibrating in its chest. James reached into his emergency kit, wincing as he pulled out a nutrient bar. "Here," he offered, holding it out to the Kroglak. A gesture of trust, of gratitude. The Kroglak hesitated, its massive head cocked to one side. Then, with a swiftness that belied its size, it snatched the bar from James's hand and devoured it. The nutrient bar was gone in 3 bites, chewed and swallowed with a desperate ferocity that spoke of prolonged starvation. A mechanical whir signaled a change. The cooling vents sputtered to life, exhaling a gust of frigid air. The temperature in the maintenance area plummeted. James shivered, pulling his tattered jacket tighter. He fumbled for his communicator, activating the emergency channel. Static crackled in his ear, followed by a garbled burst of sound. Karina, pumping, interference. The signal died, geothermal interference, of course. The Kroglak rumbled again, then gestured with its massive head. "10, RDS, the depths of the pumping station, deeper in." A flicker of understanding dawned in James's mind. A more powerful communication array, but deeper meant more danger. More hunters. He glanced back at the way they had come, then back at the Kroglak. He had to trust him. James turned his attention to the control panel, a chaotic jumble of gamelin symbols and flickering lights. He scanned the readouts, searching for any clue. Then he saw it, a series of override commands, highlighted in a crude, almost frantic script. The Kroglak had activated a containment protocol. A quick diagnosis of the hunter's gear confirmed it. The Kroglak had locked down their energy cells, overloaded their targeting systems, scrambled their frequency chips. The weapons were useless, for now. The Kroglak nudged him, urging him forward. It moved with a surprising grace for its size, navigating the narrow corridors with an intimate knowledge of the geothermal system's layout. This wasn't just a slave following orders. This was a creature who knew this place inside and out. They reached a junction. A cascade of scalding water poured from a ruptured pipe, flooding the tunnel. The air shimmered with heat. The Kroglak grunted, pointing to a narrow passage high above the flood. A tight squeeze, barely wide enough for a human, let alone a Kroglak. James hoisted the Kroglak upwards, grunting with the effort. The Kroglak scrabbled for purchase, its powerful claws finding purchase on the rough concrete. Then James followed, pulling himself into the cramped passage. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur. They moved slowly, inching their way forward. The Kroglak suddenly stopped, pressing its hand against a section of the tunnel wall. It rumbled, a low, urgent sound. James examined the area. The rock was discolored, scarred by heat. Wires snaked along the wall, disappearing into a crevice. Someone had rigged this tunnel with explosives. The Kroglak pointed to another set of wires, its massive claw hovering over the connections. It understood. It knew how to disable the trap. Working together, James and the Kroglak carefully disconnected the wires, their movements precise and deliberate. A spark arced from a severed connection. James held his breath. Nothing. They had disarmed it. Barely. As they moved further, a new sound reached their eye. Footsteps, distorted voices. The hunters were closing in. The Kroglak stopped abruptly. It pressed its hand against a section of the wall. A low grinding sound echoed through the tunnel. The wall receded, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside, alien technology hummed with power. Weapons, communication devices, schematics etched onto glowing panels, and a map, a secret escape route from the pumping station. The grinding screech of metal on metal echoed down the corridor, each decibel a hammer blow against hope. James braced himself against the wall as the pressure door slammed shut, the force of its closure nearly knocking him off his feet. Dust and rock fragments rained down from the ceiling. Trapped, he glanced at the Kroglak, its massive frame pressed against the opposite wall. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a sound of frustration and perhaps a flicker of fear. Its eyes, usually so calm, darted around the corridor, searching for an escape that didn't exist. James examined the alien technology, the multi-spectrum emitter now dangling uselessly from its severed power cable. Sparks danced across the exposed wires. The closing door had sheared clean through the cable. The Kroglak nudged the damaged power regulator with its snout, a low whine escaping its throat. It knew. It had understood the plan, the risks, and now the failure. Remembering his experience with similar circuitry in human medical equipment, the delicate balance of voltage and resistance needed to power a life support system, James ran his fingers along the regulator's casing. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a familiar focus sharpening his senses. He could fix this. He had to. Salvaged components, a steady hand, and a little luck. "I need parts," he said, his voice tight but firm. "Anything that looks like it could conduct energy. Wires, crystals, anything." The Kroglak seemed to understand. It lumbered towards the discarded hunter gear, its massive claws carefully picking through the debris. It then moved to the geothermal system's control panels, ripping off sections of conduit with surprising ease. While the Kroglak gathered materials, James rummaged through his veterinary kit, pulling out precision tools, micro screwdrivers, soldering iron, wire strippers. Tools meant for delicate surgeries, now repurposed for a desperate act of survival. He knelt beside the emitter, the smell of ozone stinging his nostrils. He worked quickly, his movements precise, his mind a whirlwind of schematics and calculations. The Kroglak stood guard, its presence a silent reassurance. A crackle from his comm unit. "Karina." "James, what happened?" "The sensor readings, they're going haywire." Karina managed to establish a clearer communication channel. "We're trapped," James said, his voice strained. "The door." It closed on the emitter's power cable. "I'm trying to fix it, but I need it back online." He briefed her on their situation, the geothermal sensors, the hunters, the desperate gamble. There was a pause, a beat of silence filled only with static. Then Karina's voice, sharp and focused. "The emitter. I recognize the technology. It's based on modified Draconid designs. Try modulating the frequency to 7-8 terahertz. That should maximize its disruption capabilities against their sensors." James adjusted the emitter, his fingers flying across the salvaged components. He rerouted a crystal matrix, spliced a wire, and muttered a silent prayer. He flicked a switch. The device sputtered, then hummed, a low, resonant vibration that filled the corridor. He and the Kroglak exchanged a look, hope fragile but present. They tested the emitter. James pointed it towards a section of the corridor, focusing the beam. The geothermal sensors flickered, then died, replaced by a static haze on their displays. A blind spot. It worked. "Okay," James said, his mind racing. "We can use this." We create a moving blind spot, disrupt their sensors, and navigate to the main control room. We override the lockdown and we get out of here. They moved through the disrupted sensor zone, the emitter casting a shroud of interference around them. The hunters' movements became erratic, confused. They stumbled, fired wildly, their thermal vision useless against the distorted geothermal readings. A squad of hunters rounded a corner, their weapons raised. James reacted instantly, swinging the emitter towards them. The hunters recoiled, clutching their heads, blinded by the sudden surge of multi-spectrum energy. James and the Kroglak used the opportunity to escape, sprinting down the corridor. But the hunters were adapting. They deployed thermal vision gear, bulky headsets that compensated for the sensor disruption. The hunt was back on. They reached the main control room, only to find it heavily guarded and reinforced. Laser grids crisscrossed the entrance, and a squad of hunters stood watch, their weapons trained on the corridor. James scanned the control room entrance. The laser grids were standard, but the door. It was different. He ran his hand along the metal surface, feeling for seams, hinges, anything. "Pressure sensitive," he muttered. "The whole room is sealed. Step on the wrong spot and the door locks down permanently." Desperate, James looked around. "Kroglak, I need a diversion. I need you to trigger a geothermal surge near the control room." The Kroglak hesitated, its eyes filled with a mix of understanding and reluctance. It knew the risks. A geothermal surge could destabilize the entire system, causing a catastrophic explosion. James met its gaze, his voice firm but pleading. "It's the only way. We create chaos, draw their attention, and I can get inside and override the lockdown." The Kroglak lowered its head, a sign of agreement. It turned and lumbered towards a nearby geothermal vent, its massive claws tearing at the safety seals. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. The ground trembled. The geothermal surge erupted, a geyser of superheated steam and molten rock. The hunters screamed, scattering in panic. James seized the opportunity. He dashed towards the control room entrance, dodging laser grids and leaping over debris. But as he reached the door, he heard a grinding sound behind him. He glanced back. The pressure door. It was closing. He and the Kroglak were pinned in the corridor as the heavy door continued to close, sealing their fate. Then, a sickening snap. The closing door had severed the emitter's power cable, the device falling silent. The sensor blind spoin vanished. They were trapped, exposed, and the hunters were closing in. The geothermal generator whined, its power fluctuating wildly. James, realizing the severed cable meant imminent door closure, yelled, "Bruiser, brace against the door, now." The Kroglak, understanding the urgency, slammed his immense shoulder against the rapidly descending metal, muscles bulging beneath his thick hide. The door shuddered, sparks flying from its damaged frame, buying them precious seconds. James, sweat beading on his forehead, scrambled towards a junction he'd spotted earlier, a bypass intended for emergency coolant rerouting. He ripped open the panel, exposing a tangle of wires and glowing conduits. With practiced speed, he rerouted the geothermal surge, channeling its raw power through the door's pressure sensors. A wave of heat washed over him, the air crackling with ozone. The door mechanism shrieked in protest, overloaded by the sudden surge. Gears ground and a thick cable snapped with a metallic twang. The door, instead of sealing shut, buckled inward slightly, retracting just enough to create a gap, a desperate sliver of hope. Bruiser, sensing the change, roared, a sound that vibrated through James's bones. He pressed his advantage, forcing his claws into the distorted metal, widening the opening with a display of raw power. The gap grew, large enough for James to squeeze through into the control room beyond. He tumbled into the room, landing hard on the metal floor. Ignoring the pain, he scrambled to his feet and raced towards the main console, a dizzying array of gamelan symbols and glowing screens. He drew upon his knowledge of human systems, cross-referencing it with the schematics Karina had shown him. his fingers flying across the alien controls. He bypassed security protocols, rerouted power grids, and disabled the lockdown sequence. The console chimed, a series of rapid, high-pitched tones signaling success. Just then the control room door hissed open, and Karina rushed in, blaster still smoking. "The hunters are down," she said, her voice tight with adrenaline. "The lockdown is lifted station-wide." Relief washed over James, but his focus immediately shifted back to Bruiser. He hurried back to the holding cell, where the Kroglak was slumped against the damaged door, panting heavily. James retrieved a device from his medical kit, an advanced diagnostic scanner he'd salvaged from a derelict human freighter years ago. "Let's see what we're dealing with," he murmured, running the scanner over Bruiser's injured flank. The scanner beeped, displaying a complex holographic image of Bruiser's internal organs. But then a series of additional signals flashed across the screen, cryptic pulses of energy emanating from deep within the Kroglak's biology. "What is it?" Karina asked, peering over his shoulder. "Distress signals," James said, his voice grim. "There are other Kroglaks, wounded, trapped in other hunting outposts. Bruiser can detect their signals, but they're too weak for anyone else to pick up." Karina stared at the screen, her mandibles twitching in distress. The full scope of the Gamelin hunting practices, the sheer cruelty and scale of it, hit her with the force of a physical blow. I didn't realize," she stammered, her voice thick with remorse. "I had no idea it was this widespread. This barbaric." She looked at James, her eyes filled with a newfound drive. "I'll help you, James, I promise, we'll save them." James nodded, his heart filled with a surge of hope. "We'll work together," he said. "Human medical ingenuity, Gamelin technology. We can create a network of Kroglak sanctuaries, a safe haven for them to heal and recover." Bruiser nudged James gently with his massive head, a low rumble resonating in his chest. It was a gesture of affection, of gratitude, of trust. And then, almost imperceptibly, the corners of his mouth twitched upward, revealing a faint, fleeting smile. Karina gasped. He understands," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "He's intelligent." James smiled. "I told you he was a big softie. We start by modifying the hunters' ships," Karina said, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We can repurpose their tracking systems for rescue efforts, their holding cells into mobile medical bays." As they worked, news of James and Karina's actions spread throughout the station. Other Gamelin, witnessing their dedication and the undeniable intelligence of the Kroglak, began to question the ethics of the hunt. Some offered assistance, providing resources, technical expertise, and even risking their own safety to help. James and Karina looked towards the future, a future where human compassion and Gamelin technology could work together to heal the galaxy, one species at a time. They were ready to use their combined skills to save Bruiser's species and build a new era of understanding. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. James, Karina, and Bruiser stood together at the entrance of a modified hunter ship, now painted with a vibrant green and blue emblem of interspecies cooperation. James clapped Bruiser on the side. "All right, big guy, ready to go home." The Kroglak made a happy rumble in his chest as he boarded the ship. "Ready for anything," James said, looking at Karina, who smiled back. Together they boarded the ship, ready to set off on their first Kroglak rescue, a journey that would take them across the galaxy, saving other species, building bridges, and proving that even the most fearsome predators could be the gentlest of souls. The stars awaited.